The following reading is by Robert McAfee Brown. He was one of the few Caucasian or Euro-American liberation theologians, writing in the late 70s and 80s. He writes, "How can beauty and the oppressed be understood together? For the Christian, the question is, how can they possibly be understood separately? So I conclude that concern for beauty is not a moral cop-out. It leads us firmly into the midst of all that is going on in our world. Where beauty is apparent, we are to enjoy it. Where there is hidden beauty, we are to unveil it. Where there is beauty defaced, we are to restore it. Where there is no beauty at all, we are to create it. All of which places us in the arena where oppression occurs, where the oppressed congregate, and where we too are called to be." After serving as the president of the UUA, the Reverend Bill Schultz went on to be the executive director of Amnesty International. That work brought him into contact with unspeakable poverty in places like Calcutta, and into relationship with persons around the world who had been tortured. Those experiences, that exposure to our human underbelly, made him ask of himself, is what I preach to the people sufficient to encompass a world in which such coarseness and brutality exists? And he wanted all those who were studying to be ministers to develop a lens for preaching that encompassed these experiences. He said, once they were acquainted with evil as reflected by such immense poverty, no one could again preach about the dancing leaves of fall. Now, as one who has been known to preach about the dancing leaves of fall, I kind of took that personally. And I didn't want to preach to you this morning about beauty from that sort of shallow perspective that Schultz was offering, and yet at the same time I want to take issue with him. I've been in Calcutta, and I've seen that poverty. I saw families living in a 3x3 sidewalk in the middle of Calcutta. I remember arriving in Mumbai and being driven around to our hotel at 1:30 in the morning. And we passed some children who were hanging out in the midst of the broken rubble of a building, and they were tapping a balloon back and forth between them. And I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I could have sworn that they were laughing. Poverty had not taken play from them. How does one talk about beauty when the world is so filled with suffering, when it is so broken? How can we not? For our world is broken, it is filled with suffering, and even in the very heart of that brokenness and suffering, there is a stunning beauty, what I would call perhaps a terrible beauty. There was a film that was made several years ago at the height of the AIDS crisis. It was called Silver Lake Life, The View from Here. And it chronicled a gay couple's struggle with HIV/AIDS. As you watched the film, you watched as one of the partners became more and more ill, more and more skeletal, more and more diminished, both physically and mentally, unrecognizable from the person you had first met. You see the devotion of the partner who cares for him. And what I will always remember about that film is the scene after the one partner dies. His partner who remains alive is crying and looking at his beloved in death. And he says over and over again of that body that is so broken, "You're so beautiful. Look at him. He's so beautiful." It was a profound moment for me in the midst of grief and death that this man's response was to see only the beauty of his partner, not the particular ravages of HIV/AIDS. There's a story that the Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel tells. It's about a woman who sees her child beheaded right in front of her by a Nazi guard. And what she does is she picks up that beheaded body and she dances with it. Death and torture and brutality did not take away the sacrament of her child's life. It did not prevent her from offering praise to the Creator of all. It could not take away the beauty of that child. This is what I mean by a terrible or a fierce beauty. Growing up, my family and I would vacation in the summers in a cabin on a pristine lake in Maine. It's not so pristine anymore. But I have memories of my time there that are embedded in me, and those memories are of the loons of that lake. They have a cry like no other. It's one that we humans tend to call mournful. Perhaps it is, perhaps it's not. And if you've ever watched them, they almost run across the surface of the water as they flap their wings wildly to get up and into flight. They are capable of diving for very long periods of time and popping up way far from where you had just seen them. And the sound of their cry and the fluttering of their running takeoff cut through the morning mist that would lay thick on those summer mornings. Loons are a beautiful bird. In the summer of 1997, I was with 16 youth and 3 other adults on a trip to live and work with the Haisla people in Kitimat, British Columbia. And one morning, one of the youth and I found ourselves untangling a fisherman's net to pick out crab that had become entangled for our group. And as we worked that net, as we pulled it in toward us, we came upon a pair of mated loons entangled. They lay dead before us. I had never been that close to a loon before. I stroked their dead bodies for a long time, seeing for the first time ever that blue-green of those feathers that are at their neck. They were beautiful. I was angry, and I was horrified. The fisherman said he was going to have them stuffed. It was a terrible, beautiful, confusing experience. Sometimes I think that beauty is all any of us have to survive suffering, that without it, we would be crushed by that immense poverty, by that evil, by torture, by cruelty, by the devastation of our earth. And I found myself wondering, why is it so often that what's valued about preaching is the prophetic over the aesthetic? I'm not talking about this false dichotomy that preaching should only be spiritual and not political. I think it has to be both. It has to provide bread for the journey as we negotiate the brokenness and suffering of our world. It must insist on beauty in the midst of that very brokenness and suffering. But beauty is not merely aesthetics. It's actually about morality. The Reverend Sean Dennison, who serves our congregation down south in Ashland, wrote, "The ability to see beauty is the beginning of our moral sensibility. What we believe is beautiful, we will not wantonly destroy. What we believe is beautiful, we will not wantonly destroy." And Sean's words made me think about those 21 youth plaintiffs in the case that Katie mentioned, that's actually being argued Tuesday, right? June 4th, up in Portland. If you want to watch it here at the church with me, you can do so. And here's what they're suing our government for. It's, quote, active participation in causing climate change, thereby violating their constitutional rights. They are demanding a science-based national climate recovery plan that would end the reign of fossil fuels and lead to swift decarbonization. The Giuliani versus United States trial will be held June 4th in Portland. And our middle schoolers wrote to the youngest plaintiff, who is now 11. His name is Levi. And as you heard, he will be here with us next Sunday right here in this sanctuary. I invite you to come and hear Levi and stay afterwards for a potluck and discussion with some other climate activists. Levi lives on Satellite Beach, which is an island off the coast of Florida. And he worries that climate change will result in his island home being wiped out, that all of its beauty will not exist, that if he does have children of his own, he will not be able to show them, to share with them the beautiful place of his childhood. His love and care for his land home, his island home, and his UU values, he is a Unitarian Universalist, are what motivated him to join the lawsuit. I remember reading a story, maybe some of you have seen this, about clowns going into refugee camps to work with children. There, in often horrible living conditions, children are given the chance to be human, to laugh at the clown's antics. Is the clown's work any less important than those who cook the food in the camp? What is more beautiful than the sound of a child's laughter emanating from those camps? Beauty awakens in us a moral imperative to act, to alleviate suffering and repair brokenness. It's not wallowing in a Pollyannish world. It's not ignoring reality. It is seeing what is and finding something that sustains us, that lifts us up. Beauty is sacred, and to be engaged in, to acknowledge it, is to create or to be a sacred task itself. And remember what Rumi said: there are 100 ways to kneel and kiss the ground, to be humbled by and find reverence in beauty. You know, you must know the phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, I think that's true, and thank goodness for that, because that means that beauty is not confined, but potentially diverse beyond measure. And as I thought about beauty in this sermon, I came up with this very cynical retort to that. I came up with this phrase, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Now, why did I come up with this phrase? Because when it comes to norms of beauty for human beings, beauty is a social construct. And if you looked at what is promoted as beautiful, and here I'm thinking of such beauty, maybe some of you saw that parade of beautiful people at places like the Met Gala in New York. You can go online and find those photos. You may never see yourself reflected there, and consequently you will say that you are the one who is lacking. These standards of beauty are constructed, airbrushed, promoted, and they're protected by the magazines and the entertainment business, and in fact, they're damaging. How many of us can spend 6 hours a day, working out? You got a personal trainer? You have your own chef who prepares your meals? How about your own makeup and hairstylist? I mean, please. And even if we could afford it, would we really want it? And as an aside, I once went on a week-long Zen retreat, and Jane Fonda's personal chef did provide the meals. I did lose 3 pounds that week. But so what? Those societally constructed norms of beauty are frankly out of reach for most of us. And if we adhere to that construct, beauty becomes a sty. As the late John O'Donohoe wrote, one of the huge confusions in our time is to mistake glamour for beauty. It's a radical act in our culture to see the beauty of any who do not fit the unattainable norm of the starved, sculpted bodies that make any of the rest of us less than. This is not the kind of beauty that sustains us. I would have been remiss if I did not address that aspect of beauty. But I want to circle back around to what Reverend Sean said, his statement that the beauty is the beginning of our moral sensibility, and to talk about Robert McAfee Brown's call for us to create beauty where it is not present. Beauty is not just dancing leaves, nor does it ignore the evil that Bill Schultz talks about. It does awaken the imperative to act. In other words, beauty is not something we hide out in to escape the realities of the world. It exists side by side or within that evil, that suffering and brokenness. It is not overshadowed or overcome by those things. It has to be acknowledged right alongside coarseness and brutality. That very coarseness and brutality inform beauty and vice versa. I interpret McAfee Brown's line, where there is no beauty at all, we are to create it, as a moral religious task. I was reminded of the work of the artist Lily Way, who's a member of the Barefoot Collective. She, in 2004, embarked on an artist's journey to Rwanda to create a memorial to the million victims of that genocide that occurred in 1994. And here's what she says about that trip. It is really through the depth of living, the chaos, the brokenness that I find peace. Joy is rooted in the depth of our suffering. It is out of my own brokenness and the brokenness of others in the darkest places that I find that sense of joy. This is my special gift, to build sacred space out of chaos in forgotten places. Beauty is a right, an angelic quality that heals. Beauty is not a luxury, but a strategy for survival. Finding beauty in a broken world is creating beauty in the world we find. More than the art of assemblage, it is the work of daring contemplation that inspires action. Recently, I was talking with someone, and it came out, as it often does, that I was a minister, and actually the minister here. And that person thanked me not for our social justice stands, but for the beauty of the grounds of this church. She talked about it as a gift to all who drive or walk by or bike by and see it. And I encourage you to take some time to walk around these grounds. These flowers that Jane collected this morning are from our own grounds. Those of you who designed our landscape, planted it, tend and care for it, are engaged in the religious task of creating beauty. It is just as important as what goes on in the sanctuary in worship, or perhaps it's an extension of what goes on in the sanctuary in worship. I would go so far as to assert that the landscaping of these grounds has made these grounds sacred. You know, I've spent a lot of time recently sitting as I've recovered from my knee replacement surgery, and because the weather has been so amazing, not so hot as these last couple of days, much of that sitting took place on our front porch. And from that perch, I watched the trees. Now, there are so many colors of green in Oregon and in those trees. I ran out of names for those greens really quickly. There's no green that has the names. We don't have the words yet for all those greens. That might be something somebody could make some money out of. Nor do we even have all the words for the different shapes of the leaves. Such shimmer in the leaves as the wind made them dance. When I thought of what to share with you, the above came to mind, and then I questioned myself, being reminded of Bill Schultz's words. Are these words enough? Is this simple beauty enough? Is it responsive to the world's suffering and brokenness? Is it part of the healing of that suffering and brokenness? Will it awaken a moral imperative to act? There's so many ways to create beauty, through words, through music, through movement, through observation, through all the mediums of art, through the restoration of beauty, through the simplest of acts. There's so many ways to honor beauty, to become aware of it, to introduce others to it, to meditate on it, to be present to it, to protect it, to name it as sacred, healing, potent. It is not merely dancing leaves. It's a religious imperative to end suffering. It's a religious imperative to create beauty. I leave you with these words. The Reverend Mary Catherine Morin writes, "Beauty does more than awaken us. It also admonishes us. It demands something. We are here in religious community not to hide from the anguished cries or the tender lullabies. We are here in religious community not to protect our hearts from breaking. We are here together to borrow courage for the task of coming alive. We are here so that together we might heed the admonition of beauty, answer its call to create, protect, and preserve." As we leave this place today, I ask you to go forth to be the beauty that you love, to discover the hundreds of ways to kiss the ground, to answer the call of beauty, to create, protect, and preserve. May it be so.